Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. We often visit parks and gardens on Across the Fence, and when we do, it's a chance to learn about new plants or get ideas for our own landscapes. Today we'll be leaving the Vermont countryside to explore a unique park within the hustle and bustle of New York City. It's called the High Line. Our guide to see and learn about the High Line is Leonard Perry from UVM Extension and the Department of Plant and Soil Science. Well, it's great to see you. This is very exciting. I've always wanted to visit this place.
Well, it's very exciting to be here and be able to share some photos. I got to go there this last summer with my wife in July, and finally I'd seen photos, heard about it for some years, and so I thought I'd bring some of those to share today.
It's actually a reclaimed piece of landscape.
It is, and it's very unique. It's becoming well known in the world. It's fairly recent. It only started in 2009, but it's above the city streets of New York. It's a linear park. It's about 1.5 miles long, and it's basically on an old rail line, as you see in this photo here. This is above the streets, and it's so amazing because it's like woods, and we'll see all the different types of habitats and landscapes they have here at the High Line in New York. Basically, the reason they put it there, the rail line, was back in the late 1800s. There was a lot of commerce in New York, and so they brought in the trains, or they put train tracks in. Of course, it was built up, so they had to put them down the street. So as you can figure, trains and people and cars don't mix very well. So then they elevated these. So in 1934, they started running trains above the streets until 1980, the last one ran. And so, and here you see the elevated, this was a rail line above the streets of the west side of New York that brought all these goods down, and then it basically became derelict and lay in ruins for about 20 years, which we'll see in a minute. But I wanted to really set the stage here. This is the Google satellite picture of Manhattan, with the Hudson River on the left and the East River on the right. Of course, east is Brooklyn, and west to the left is New Jersey. So you see that line I drew in the middle, that's the High Line, right up starting around Lincoln Tunnel. It comes in around the mid part, and right near, you see Times Square right in the center, Central Park's at the top, Empire State Building, that's a good landmark, what we'll see. So again, about 1.5 miles long, and this is a map from the website, which is great, highline.org, of the first phase, which June of 2009 opened from down, it actually went below that originally, but the High Line only starts at Gansevoort Street and goes up to 20th Street. That was the first phase, and then 2 years later in June 2011, the second one opened up, and then the third one, that loop at the top, to 34th Street in September of 2014. And that is where that's important to look at, because that's where the trains actually came up. That's an incline, so that loop around kind of C-shape, and then they're above ground for the rest of the line that goes down. And that little spur that goes to the right, that's going to be the one that opens supposedly this year, that went to mail houses there and delivered mail by train. Now, if you go to the website with your smart device or however app or just website, it's great because you can look up. They have just so much information. In other words, I went to last year, July, in different parts to see what was in bloom, so I could really see, and so you can learn a lot of the plants just by going to their website.
Now, you're actually, if you're actually on the High Line, you can use your smartphone to learn about the plants, as you mentioned, and there must be a variety of access points then on the High Line?
There's a lot of steps and elevators, and those are on the map as well, so the book will show later. But why don't we get into some photos, and this is the upper part. Behind me is that new part that opened. This is where it starts being above ground. You can see the landscape and people starting to use it. A couple things to note in this, you can't really see it because of the construction behind this Empire State Building in the distance, but that's the new Hudson Yards, which is this huge development in New York City. It's going to be all kinds of tall skyscrapers and mixed use type of settings, but that's the same view back when the trains were running. That's amazing. Isn't that amazing how the trains are pulling all this freight cars down to that part of west side of Manhattan. So that's the view, and then when they stopped running after 1980 for about 20 years or a little over, this is what happened. It just went to weeds and became derelict. And in fact, they did a flora in 2003, if you can imagine, found 161 different species of plants.
No kidding.
About half were introduced and half were native plants that could take those rough conditions up there. And so it's kind of like New York with all the immigrants. Well, a lot of these introduced introduced plants came in on the freight from all over the world, you know, seeds of various plants, and they actually did well in that kind of environment. Now, in the upper part on the left side, that's looking across the current rail yards that go into Penn Station. It's a very easy walk. That's how we went in on the train and then just walked over to this. Jacob Javits Convention Center in the distance. Then on the right is Pershing square beams. These were actually, they exposed the beams of the original track and made it into a play area for kids. So there's a lot of different places to interact. Here you see kid and family interacting, but they left a lot of the rails, which you'll see throughout these pictures, which is just great. A siding there, you know, the way the tracks change, a lot of things like that. And they also mirrored that with a lot of things like the benches. That just reflects like a stop, you know, at the end of a track. But these are all benches and seating, and the lines kind of throughout, the parallel lines kind of mimicked the train tracks. But a lot of great spaces to sit and enjoy the nature. And you can see, you would know this is above the streets of New York City. These are the caramel coral bells and one of the carex grasses, a native, both natives. Native Appalachian sedge, actually similar to grass, but just with the gravel there. Again, the gravel of the, you know, former rail bed, but left there. And then you can see here on this curve, upper curve, all those people sitting there just enjoying the naturalness here of the switchgrass in the background, a prairie kind of scene, and then with the coneflowers mixed in. This landscape was done by Piet Udolf, who is from Holland. He's the author. He's one of the top naturalistic landscape designers in the world, and incorporated just hundreds of different species and literally thousands of plants in this highline garden. Here you see some choice plants like the Brunnera, the Siberian bugloss, that silvery leaf, great shade plant for our own gardens in the foreground, mixed with a nice textural contrast with the ferns, underneath some native shrubs here. But again, those train tracks left in. Actually, they pulled up the tracks to redo all this, numbered them, and put them right back where they belong. So here you see a lot of different grasses, switch grasses and such, in a meadow walk. There's another section going down. You see more grasses planted in between these pavers to, again, simulate those rails in the high line. And then here you see a rail kind of in the walkway there. And then you see on the left a nice repetition of grass and catmint to kind of lead your eye down as you walk along above the city streets in New York. Again, this is above the streets on the high line. This is Rudbeckia and Tixie, the Coreopsis, again, both native plants, along with some native grasses. I just love the way they're all mixed in and so natural. And then here is a geranium, a creeping geranium and a creeping sedum. Nice combination. You can just spend a lot of time looking at all the plant combinations in these. And then down on 23rd Street, this is a lawn area. So again, very different type of habitat from what those natural ones we're seeing there, but again, a space that people can use when it's open. They have to close it periodically, let the grass regrow, but just a beautiful green space there in New York City. That's amazing to see how well those plants are doing. Yeah, and all, again, above the city streets. And keep in mind, most of those have a foot, maybe 18 inches at most of soil to grow in. A few of those trees have maybe 36 inches, but not a whole lot. And so it's interesting, the climates here in New York, that area is in a zone 7, but it goes a zone colder in winter, zone 6, and a zone warmer in summer, zone 8. So 3 hardiness zones just in the high line those plants have to withstand. All right, what comes next? Okay, well, let's continue. And it's kind of one of the things I really enjoyed about the high line was you just not knowing what you were going to see next. It's kind of like a play in New York, walking from one, you know, area to another, like seeing a different scene open up. And right from the lawn, we walked into woodlands here. So you see the birch trees and just all kinds of native plants and shrubs. Here again, a coral bells, one of the purple ones, again with those Appalachian or Pennsylvania sedge grasses. A very nice contrast. These were original. There's a lot of art, and even in the original construction, these were above the city streets. They did a wonderful job with the railings there. These were original to the train tracks, and you see an old track again buried in the grasses there. And of course, with all these native plants, it's a great habitat for the wildlife. Here's a red Admiral Butterfly. We saw lots of butterflies and bees up there. Of course, it's a nice migration route for a lot of wildlife like birds, so a great setting for those animals as well, not just the humans. And of course, New York needs its art. This is actually made out of rebar. It's an art sculpture to simulate graffiti on the wall behind it. So
yeah, that's
it
very
looks
effective.
like it's on the wall, but it's actually, you know, a sculpture, which is kind of neat. So just some examples. Here's a mural, you know, 2 or 3-story on a building. You could see from the High Line walking along, and then another piece of sculpture right there along the walk. So it's just a lot of. And then you see a meadow area, and that's just, you know, with the coneflowers. That's a blue stars in the foreground, which is another native plant from the Ozark and mountain area, the Amsonia. And then there's a helenium in there, Helen's flower, and grasses. The building in the back with the windows is something to note. That's was refrigerated storage. At the time, it was the largest in the world at late 1800s. They used the water from the Hudson to help cool areas for the produce and the meats and such. But again, all native plants, the tall spiked blazing star, the coneflower, the native monarda there, just all growing together. It looks like just natural. And again, catmints and sedum and geraniums, but just you wouldn't know this was planted and is being maintained as a garden. You learned a lot of new plants. I know I didn't know the American feverfew, a native from out in the Midwest, and you see a bee on this one. And then you see the milkweed. A lot of people do know the orange milkweed, a bee on this. I can just imagine the butterflies love this too. And then this was an interesting plant. You know, you see the spiked blazing star in the left, but on the right with kind of, looks like yucca leaves on it coming from the base, very sharp. And you see inside of the flowers, they're kind of button shaped. It's an eryngium. I love the name, Eryngium yuccifolium. Yucca-like leaves.
You have to be careful how you say that.
Yeah, and the common name is a rattlesnake master. So I always wonder what it says. And then this is interesting, a compass plant. Again, growing over rail over the streets of New York. This plant aligns its leaves with north-south, hence it's called the compass plant. I love this one. This is above the street. This is Joe Pye weed. This grows in wet areas naturally around here, and here it is growing above the streets of New York in 18 inches of soil. I just thought that was amazing. And below that, this is what you see, the meatpacking district. You know, so you can see all these plants. It's like one of the world's largest green roofs and linear roofs. And finally, this is a nice one. This is looking down 10th Avenue. At the time it was called, that's where the train tracks ran before they elevated them. It was called Death Avenue because of all the problems they had. And you see the inset up there, that's a train. And they had these men on horses called cowboys that went down with a red flag trying to get people out of the way. But obviously it didn't work, so they had to raise the rails. But where else but New York do people sit in an amphitheater and watch the traffic go by?
That's incredible. Now, there's obviously a lot of activities for people, both locals and tourists.
There are. In that area, that's a nice square area, kind of park seating, and there's a lot of food vendors, and there's just so you can get food there as well. And one of the things that food has to be locally sourced on these, so you can get like New York beers and wines and cheeses and such. But also, looking here, you see the people sitting, vines there, and then take a look at the left a little closer. You see caramel coral bells. You see some grasses. And then you see inset there how they remove the planking so they can get at the roots of the trees. This is a three-flowered maple. In the distance is a Statue of Liberty looking down the other way on 10th Avenue through the more grasses. And you see the spurs coming off the sidings. This is how they deliver to the buildings. The left is Chelsea Market. Wonderful shops and restaurants. At one time, Nabisco, where all those goodies came from. And this is a spur which they actually replanted to look like when it had taken over with the weeds. A lot of views, the lower part of the High Line. This is Pier 54. This is where the Carpathia brought the survivors in from the famous Titanic, and then it's just got a lot of history there. It's used for entertainment now. A wonderful area. People can cool off in the summer, walking in the water feature. A bog garden. So there's some different bog plants in there. And then there's some lovely seating. This is, again, simulating the rails with the rolling along, looking out to the west.
Now, also, we look at pictures, and also you talked about the website, but there are books.
Yes, there is a book on that, the Highline, and so we just brought a couple of pictures of that real quick, but there is the book, and it's just wonderful. It walks you through it. It has the maps and so forth in it, and here you see an example of the maps of each section, and then this is some great pictures showing how they do. All these volunteers show up, hundreds in the spring, to cut the plants back, and you see the daffodils coming out. So they cut these back in the spring. It's lit up at night. You can get a lot of ideas for your own garden, night lighting at night. And then in the wintertime, this is what it looks like, but it will renew in the springtime, as you can see there.
Now, if folks didn't get enough of gardens, they can go to your website.
Right, and I've got a lot more pictures of various gardens on perrysperennials.info.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Judy.
That's our program for today. I'm Judy Simpson. We'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.